Hi, Nandini. Thank you so much for making time to share your thoughts on the wonderful chapter you've written on the joy of mindfulness in the book that you also co edited with Paul. It must have been a wonderful journey and memory to do that. And I really wanted to create an opportunity for you to share with your readers and the listeners of this podcast. The essence of your chapter, and I read it, I devoured it. I'm also a sort of a diligent meditator, and so I really appreciate that you're putting it out there for more people to access this practice. So would it be okay if I just ask you a few questions so you can share your thoughts about the chapter and unveil the invitation that it contains for our readers and listeners? How does that sound?
Thank you, Khyati. Thank you very much, for your interest and curiosity and practice of mindfulness.
Wonderful. I think that's actually a good place to start. We're using the word mindfulness, but I've also, as in my own introduction, mentioned the word meditation. So I think a lot of people use mindfulness and meditation interchangeably. I know your chapter touches on this in the beginning, but if you could just share for the benefit of the listeners, what is the essential difference, if any, between mindfulness and meditation?
Thank you, Khyati, for that question. To be honest with you, I have asked a lot of people about this, experienced and expert meditators. And after a lot of my own ground research and my own personal experience of meditation, this is what came about, that mindfulness is a state of being, a state of mind, where you're able to observe in a non-judgmental fashion what is coming up for you in the moment. So it is a state of non-doing, and a state of calm, and just observing without judgment. The most important thing is observing without judgment. Now, this is easier said than done. It's very easy to say this, but when we are under stress, it is very difficult to observe without judgment, without reaction, without emotion. So then comes, what is meditation? Meditation is the verb, the doing of it, the doing of the training of your mind to get into this state in a relatively easier way. So in the chapter in this book, I have highlighted a lot of research which shows that practiced meditators have huge advantage over others in terms of getting into the state of mindfulness. And you and I know from all our brain research and study that if a mind is disturbed, if a mind is agitated in a state of chaos, the decision making that happens is not necessarily the best in that situation. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad you zeroed in on decision making as a sort of, a benefit, or, improved decision making as an output of, mindful meditation. Because, I feel that that's essentially what leaders and teams and organizations need, this clarity, this quality decision making. Because, as we say in the thinking environment, the quality of everything we do depends on the quality of thinking we do first. So could you share a little bit about, what would a more mindful leader, a more mindful team, or even a mindful organization look like, and how could we get there? What would be the practices of such an organization, and then what would be the benefit, not just to the organization but to society at large, of having such an organization?
Yeah, I'm glad you said the organization. The thing is that an organization comprises of human beings. So you will have several, people in the team. You will have the leader. Then the organization is made of all of these people, and several organizations probably create like the work culture or the work environment, and then all these people go out into their private lives and they create society. So the individual construct here is the person, and the leader is even someone managing, even one person is a leader. And in any case, all of us have to lead ourselves. So we are all actually practicing leadership, and the thing here is that decision making, as I said, is hugely impacted if you are not able to create a space for yourself where you can reflect in a non-judgy and non-judgment led, and in a, I would say, uh, in a bit of a detached manner as to what's coming up. And this is not possible overnight. People get into leadership positions on the basis of the work that they have probably done in the past, the way they have not only performed, but the way they have managed their teams. But the thing that I find very often is that when I talk to leaders, they are not able to pinpoint that they are able to create space for themselves to reflect, to think, to actually observe in a non-judgmental way. And just that act of observation can lead to new insights, new way of thinking. It can unlock a lot of other things which you might not see otherwise. So there are huge benefits of mindfulness, even as a mental stance in leaders. And this chapter is really an invitation to leaders to try this. My conversations with a lot of leaders shows that they don't even have like a practice where they give themselves this space of stillness. Instead, trying to solve problems, they fill up their calendar with even more. So usually that is the practice, that to solve a problem, they fill up their calendar with more activities, more tasks, more meetings, more of everything, essentially. But that just opens more tabs in the brain. So, so the leader's brain is very, very precious. It's a place, which basically is very precious, very valuable to the organization. And mindfulness is a way of nurturing that space.
I love that reminder of mental stance and just the value of a leader's mental stance and just how it would ripple out in terms of benefits to anyone that leader interacts with. And I'm hearing that, or I'm seeing that a lot of leaders do already have a sense of the value of creating that kind of time and space and mental stance in their day. And sometimes I feel the intention is there, but it's almost like, well, how do I get started? How do I create even maybe a ritual or a practice that is sustainable, realistic, given the demands on my schedule? And that's what I also appreciated about your chapter. It had so many practical insights about getting started. So again, if for the benefit of our listeners, you could just highlight some of those, start small, start strong type practices, that could really just help a well-intentioned leader get started.
Yes, Kathy, and I love the way you said start small, start strong. It's really about start small, start strong. The first thing in starting any practice is intention. So you have to set intention to actually do this for a set number of days. Like you cannot experiment with it and come out of it, because that will not set the habit. As we know, the habit is more important. So perhaps, setting up a target, like you can start as small as 7 days, like for 7 days, I'm going to sit for 10 minutes. And it's not easy. It's not easy to sit for 10 minutes for 7 days. Usually I prescribe some kind of a ritual, like, there's a space in the house which you can allocate for this. You can set up the space nicely, with maybe a favorite cushion or something like that, put a candle there, light a lamp. These are all ways of, sparking that action. And initially, you don't even have to worry too much about what's going to happen. There are wonderful apps out there today which guide your sort of practice. So use the apps. And then, slowly you will see. The thing here is, like anything else, it is the consistency that really makes a big difference.
Yeah, I know from my own practice, when I really wanted to turn it into a habit, what you said really resonated with me. There's creating that association where a certain time of the day and a certain place was just associated with my mindful meditation. So then after a while, it just became like you just slip into a natural state or a natural ritual versus it being this conscious effort to actually sort of implement something in your day. So I think that reminder is really helpful. Um, the other thing also, which, we're talking about personal benefits, once you've experienced it, nobody has to sell it to you because you really just, you just know firsthand how much it's doing for you.
Yeah.
But what I also liked about your chapter was for those who haven't experienced it firsthand and are reaping the benefits, it's just a very rich repository of all the research and evidence out there on the benefits of mindfulness. It's almost like you've taken us, through a journey or a history of that evidence and how it's unfolded. So maybe if you could just pick some highlights of that evidence, almost like a did you know, and what would be really interesting for our listeners to learn that, wow, we were aware that there's probably benefits of it, but we didn't know this is the extent of the evidence-based research. Anything that spoke to you?
Yes, so I did a lot of fact finding because there are many of us. I'm also one of them who likes to know what is the evidence behind anything, and therefore it was really enriching for me personally to go into all the details and all the papers and books and practices that are out there. So essentially, I have tried to create some kind of a timeline or history of mindfulness coming into sort of organizational parlance, because it was never there before a few years ago. And I think it's a sign of the times. There's so much chaos, and there's so much conflict, chaos, uncertainty, the term called VUCA, which exists. In the face of all this, mindfulness has also come up, like perhaps like a solution or a way of being, of managing your mind. There's a lot of evidence to say that it changes not only your emotional awareness, but it changes your attention. It has a positive impact on your memory, and all of us are struggling with these issues. It has a positive impact on your health. And it also creates that connection between attention, emotional regulation, memory, and even health. There is a connection apparently. So the amazing thing about the research is what it's saying is that the mind body distinction is not real. Like, the research on mindfulness is showing us that mind body are intricately connected with each other. And if we can calm our mind, we can see benefits in our body.
Yeah. I mean, I just love the idea of just that basic reminder that it is about calming the mind. And in a VUCA world, just a sense of calm is so compelling and so difficult to achieve. I think what might also be helpful for the readers and listeners, and you also touch on this, that's why I think it's such a comprehensive chapter on mindfulness, is that there is considered to be a dark side of mindfulness. That there are maybe some situations or some cases where it would either just not work for someone, or it would work, but you would have to sort of be aware, like have a disclaimer on the experience that you might encounter. So if you could just unwrap a little bit this idea of there being a dark side to mindfulness, especially since we've spoken so much about the benefits of it.
Yes, Kathy, I'm glad you brought it up, because I wanted to have a balanced view of mindfulness and not sound like some kind of pedant that I am not doubting mindfulness as a panacea for all evils. And of course, there are issues. So the state of mind also determines whether you can build this practice in a consistent way. And there are like issues like depression, sadness, extreme depression. And that's where in fact nowadays people tend to say, oh, just do meditation, and it just do meditation if you're feeling low. But really, no. Depression is or sadness is a very complex issue. It's considered to be a wicked problem. Neurologists, psychiatrists all over the world are trying to figure out, how, what is this big elephant really look like, considering mental health is such a big issue. I would say that, if it really, unleashes a lot of physical distress in you, and it can happen, then it's time to perhaps, take a foot backward and see that, how you can sort of do it. And the other thing is that also doing small practices, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, those are the ways to get into it, and your body will tell you, your mind will tell you whether it works for you or not. So, this is one point as far as, is mindfulness for me or not. Try it. If it doesn't work for you, fine, maybe you can try it again. But if it really doesn't work for you, it's all right. I have a bit in the chapter where I have, showcased some research on the dark side of mindfulness, and maybe readers would be interested in going through, the papers that I have indicated in the chapter also. Also, when person is under extreme stress, and having literally body reactions, you can't ask them to sit in a corner and light a lamp. And so it really doesn't work in all situations, and one needs to be mindful of that. Yeah.
And I think it's a helpful reminder that if that is the case for you at this point in time, it's more a matter of, okay, maybe not now, or not as sort of rigorously to start off with, and just see what is manageable, rather than sort of conforming to some sort of idea that this is what I need to do if I'm doing it properly, or I'm doing it well, just for the sake of getting started.
Yes, there are things with mindfulness that I want to say. That first of all, nobody, no third person or no second person in the world can tell you whether your practice is working for you or not. Nobody except you. Like, nobody except me can really say whether the practice is working for me or not. So, more important is to rely on your own experience rather than what anybody wants to say. The second thing is that it is a free tool available to everybody to increase resilience, to increase, it's like a tool that you can use whenever there is trouble or distress in your life, to improve your decision making, for so many things. This works, but it's a free tool, and it's up to you to cultivate that tool. Yeah, so no second person can tell you whether this tool is right for you or not. So all that given, setting the intention and trying it out is every individual's choice. Whether they really want to do it or not, it's up to them.
Yeah, and that's the other thing I enjoyed about your chapter. You almost at one point outlined a little bit of the journey a beginner would expect to experience, which I think is helpful to just know in advance that even though it's such an individual journey, there are likely to be phases, and then how can you persist through the various phases. That was also very
yes. And I am the best, I would say, evidence of the journey, so that's why I put my own experience there. But everyone's journey is unique and very interesting and different.
Yeah, and like you're saying, it's an untapped opportunity for everyone. It's just there for the taking, and it's a matter of just try it and see for yourself. So maybe just sort of as a parting thought, if you could just share with listeners and readers, what is the invitation, the overall invitation, or the call to action that you think would most benefit those listening?
Well, the call to action, I would say, is to just try. The book has not been written from the perspective of an expert. I am no expert in meditation or mindfulness. I'm a seeker. I'm just someone who is looking at, what else is there that can help my mind to work in an optimal way. So it's written from that perspective, the book. So I'm not trying to, hopefully the languaging is such that I'm just like anybody else. I have my everyday shares of ups and downs, issues, And that's natural, that's normal. Life is not like a sort of a melody really for me, like it's, or for anybody else. We have to deal with ups and downs in the notes, but this is just written from the point of a fellow seeker, that here's my journey, this is the research, maybe you want to try this. So that's the perspective really.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we're really lucky that you took the time and the effort. I mean, the research and pulling it together to write a chapter, which I think is just so valuable for anybody. It has such a wide appeal. It's so accessible. It's so rich in both depth and breadth. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your joy of mindfulness with others.
Thank you. Thank you, Khyati. Thank you very much.